First of all, I want to welcome everyone here tonight. My name is Alan Katz, for those of you that don't know me, but most of you do. And I want to thank all of you because this is a members event. This is something that we like to do for our members because without our members, we wouldn't be able to do all the other things that we do. And under the leadership of Claire Bishop. Claire, where are you? Raise your hand. Where is Claire? She out of there? Okay, so she's out. Anyway, Claire's our executive director. Claire in the back there, wave your hand. Thank you. Okay, very good. I mean, Claire is the one that really makes things work around here, and we're very, very fortunate that she joined us at the end of April. And we are one of her ideas was to have a series of events for members. And I think hopefully tonight is the first one of a series, first in the series. So I want to thank you all. Also, I want to say that we are very fortunate. We have a relationship with William Jewell College, and we are now American Public Square at Jewell. We have the president of William Jewell College with us tonight, and she has declined the opportunity to speak, but she has decided that she would wave to you all. So Elizabeth, would you please wave to everyone? Thank you very much. And the special appreciation, we have some sponsors for this program that make these things work for us. Jerry White and Cyprian, who raise your hand. Cyprian, there you go, are our sponsors of our program, along with John and Marnie Sherman and Z-Trip. And we have presenting sponsors. These are people who give us money to put on all of our programs throughout the year. And we have the City of Kansas City, the Hall Family Foundation, the H&R Block Foundation, PlexPod, and of course, William Jewell College. So thank you all very much. Now this is actually part of a series that we are inaugurating called the Nuts and Bolts of Democracy. And this is the first of what we hope will be 4 of these programs throughout the next year. The final one, which we plan to have after the election, entitled What Have We Done? And so we'll see how well we can progress. Now, it's really a great pleasure for me to introduce our guest tonight. He was a political strategist, lawyer extraordinaire, general overall wizard of delegates, and that is my good friend Jeff Berman. Now, Jeff and I met in the Obama campaign in 2007 when Jeff was the director of all delegate operations for Obama, and I served on the Democratic National Committee and was an Obama delegate. And from there, our friendship grew. And everything I know about the delegate operation or the delegate process, I learned from this guy. As I told him earlier tonight, I used to think I knew a lot about stuff. And then when I got to know Jeff and he explained these things to me, I realized how little I knew. So therefore, I assume that you all may be in the same place that I was. He wrote a book after that called The Magic Number. I encourage you all to buy it. Inside Obama's Chase for the Presidential Nomination. It's a particularly good book because I'm mentioned favorably. He served in the same role with the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016. Prior to that, he'd worked for the presidential campaigns of Richard Gephardt and also, most recently, Beto O'Rourke. He serves on the Democratic National Committee now on the Rules and Bylaws Committee and has been involved with most of the rewrite of the rules over the last 10 years of the Democratic Party. So please join me in welcoming Jeff Berman. Now, Jeff, we're talking about the whole delegate process, the whole nomination process that most people only know about sort of at 20,000 feet, and you know about it at about 500 feet or 5 feet, as the case may be. So why don't you start off by trying to explain what, if people really ask themselves the right question, which is, why do Iowa and New Hampshire, states which in their total, the number of delegates they have is probably slightly more than 100 and you need more than 2,000 to get the nomination, why do they matter?
Yeah, well, thank you, Alan. And I want to thank American Public Square also for sponsoring this event. I think trying to bring people together of different viewpoints is really, really important, especially in these times when we don't always have so much good public discussion of the issues facing the country and all the challenges. So I want to thank you for that. So why do Iowa, New Hampshire matter so much? You know, it's interesting. The way the nominating process works, I always like to tell people, is that it's a serial process where one thing affects another. And so the importance of Iowa and New Hampshire is that they're first. And everything that follows is affected by the results in Iowa and New Hampshire. It's just a simple reality. And when you think of the general election, we all know the battleground states and where the real contest is joined in the fall election. We can identify those states and we can plan those campaigns and know that the competition will be sharp, but in some ways it's predictable because we know the Republicans and the Democrats in those states and the unaffiliated voters. The thing about the primaries is that the order of the voting is not always the same from one presidential cycle to the next, because every state sets their own date for when their contest will be, and a lot of times they change every 4 years. So the order of the voting is really very important. And if you think back to, for instance, the Obama-Clinton race in 2008, it began in Iowa. Obama had his breakthrough in Iowa where he won that state. Then Hillary comes back and wins New Hampshire a week later. And then they go to Nevada, and it's basically kind of a tie where it's so close, neither has an advantage. And in the end, our projection was that Obama won one more delegate than Hillary to the national convention from Nevada. So the race was kind of locked up, and then it went to South Carolina. And of course, in South Carolina, the African American vote is about 60% of the vote. And that was a crucial opportunity for Obama. But he would not have done as well in that state had he not already won in Iowa. It was winning in Iowa that established his viability, and that convinced the voters of South Carolina, particularly in the African American community, that he was a real choice for the presidency. There was a skepticism they had, would America really vote for a black president? And what they saw in Iowa was that the answer was yes, because that state is 95% plus white. And so that gave people confidence in South Carolina that he could be elected and that he could win votes outside of their community. And so it was crucial. But the key is that the voting starts in Iowa, and the Democratic Party has given that status of first in the nation to Iowa. And people always ask me, well, why is that, and is that fair? What about other states? Why don't they get a turn? Why don't we rotate who goes first? And the simple answer is it's not really about fairness. Iowa was going first for a long time, and basically what they did was they wrote it into their state law that they would go before any other state. So if any other state scheduled a contest, they would just go earlier. And New Hampshire, it's funny, but they did that. It's kind of a unilateral thing. And New Hampshire, for a long time, was the first primary to vote. Iowa being a caucus, a different system. And New Hampshire, what they wrote into their state law was that New Hampshire would be the first of its type of contest. And so they basically created an exception that they would let Iowa go first, and they wouldn't fight about it because Iowa would be the first caucus, and then New Hampshire would be the first primary. And between the two of them, they actually have kind of a pact that together we'll fight for our early 1-2 status, and if anybody goes in front of us, we'll both jump ahead of them. And so they have this sort of informal pact between the two states and the political and the elected officials in those states sort of recognized this. And the National Party, after years of other states trying to jump in front of them, creating all kinds of chaos, finally just said, okay, we'll let you two guys go. We'll let you two guys go first and try and bring some stability and order to the voting. And that's actually worked. And so, is it fair? It may not be fair in the sense that rotation would be fair. Of course, then we'd have to pick, well, which of the other 49 states gets to go first, and that would be some kind of shootout that's just too complicated. It's just easier, and the other thing is that those two states are actually pretty good at going first. Their voters are now used to it. They take this so seriously in a way that other states who haven't had that experience haven't really developed maybe those same traditions as fully as Iowa and New Hampshire. When the candidates come to campaign, everyone turns out and asks questions, and they don't go to hear just one candidate, they go to hear all of them. And it's like an occupation, which is going to hear candidates, learning what their views are. And so it just seems like to the National Party that this system works. We now have stability. We don't have states jumping in front of each other so that we don't know who's first anymore. The candidates, they need to know who's first because that's where they need to go, because that's where they start and try and build momentum from the first vote. So I can tell you in 2007 and 8, when I was with Barack Obama, that our campaign kept asking me, because there was a question at that time, because Allen's state at that time of Florida and Michigan, they wanted to both go early in the same period as Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina. And that created a lot of instability because if they were going to move up, then the other states were going to move ahead of them. And so it was in the fall around this time when nobody knew when these states were going to vote, because Iowa and New Hampshire were saying, if those two states move up, we're moving up, and we don't care how early, we'll even vote before Christmas. And the campaign manager was saying, I don't know how to schedule a candidate. I don't know how to buy advertising if we don't know when these contests are. And I said, well, it's just going to have to sort it. You have to wait while it sorts itself out. And eventually it did, but it really was nerve-wracking for the campaign planners to figure that out. And that's no way to run a contest. So basically, we have accepted them, and we have stability. And by the way, once we decided that Iowa and New Hampshire would go first, and then we picked two more states to go early, and it's Nevada and South Carolina because they're from two different regions. So you have Iowa from the Midwest, New Hampshire from the Northeast, Nevada from the West, and South Carolina from the South. And the idea was, okay, we have 4 early states, at least it's balanced by region. And Nevada has a very big Latinx population and it's organized labor in all of the big casino resorts. And then South Carolina has a big African American population. So we are trying to diversify the voting representation in the early states. And so we have those 4 early states, and you know what? The Republicans said, you guys actually did pretty good. We are going to agree to the same 4 early states, because what the Democrats do and what the Republicans do don't have to be the same. There's no laws on when the primaries are held, no national laws. There's nothing in the Constitution about how we nominate presidents. We've got the Electoral College and everything about the general election, but we have nothing on how the parties are to operate and pick our nominees. So what we have now is a situation where the 2 national parties are actually operating kind of in sync, at least procedurally, on the order of the voting for the first 4 states. And then after those 4 states vote, which will all be in February, a week apart, it's very orderly, Then, starting in March, the window opens up, and both national parties let any state vote in whatever order they want through the rest of the spring. And so basically, it's up to the legislatures in each state, and if it's Republican-controlled, then essentially the Republicans set the date for that state's primary, and if it's Democratic-controlled state, then the Democrats are picking it. And the whole system actually kind of works almost, you have to say, by accident, but it's not completely by accident because the national parties, especially I would say the Democratic Party, has put a lot of thought into how to structure the system to make it as coherent as possible for the candidates and the voters. Because if the candidates can't run their campaigns properly, it's the voters who lose out, right? Because the job of the candidates is to communicate with the voters. And ultimately, this is a democracy, and the voters have to hear the candidates to be able to make their choices. And so it's up to us in the party structure to produce a system. We're on our own to produce a system that will carry that out and make that happen. And I think we've actually done a pretty good job. Though, again, you could argue, why does Iowa still get to go first? And why is New Hampshire the first primary? But I've just told you that's the reason, and basically it works.
Okay, so just two quick sidebars here. The two states that have been added, which Jeff alluded to, which is Nevada and South Carolina. Well, it's true there was this great study by the party, et cetera, but as luck would have it, Harry Reid was the majority leader and the senator from Nevada, and lo and behold, Nevada wound up as the western state. And Don Fowler, who had been a chairman of the Democratic National Committee, was on the Rules and Bylaws Committee with his wife, and lo and behold, he wound up in South Carolina. I'm not saying that had anything to do with anything.
And it didn't hurt that Jim Clyburn was from South Carolina.
That's true too, right? But so Jeff, explain this. Traditionally, there are like 18 candidates currently running for president on the Democratic side. And how many do you think will be left after Iowa and New Hampshire, and why?
Yeah, well, that's also very interesting. I will tell you that empirically speaking, no more than 3 candidates have won delegates in Iowa in the modern era. We have never had 4 or more candidates come out of Iowa with any kind of viability or momentum. And part of it is just due to the math. If you have, in order to earn delegates under the party rules, you need to earn at least 15% of the vote. And so what that means is if you have 3 candidates, at a bare minimum, they've eaten up 45%. But you know, like when Obama ran, he was at 38% in Iowa, and excuse me, John Edwards was at 30, and Hillary was at 29. Most people don't know Hillary came actually in 3rd place in 2008, but it was virtually a tie for 2nd. But if you were to add up 30 and 30 and 38, well, that's a lot. That's like 98, and that's why only 3 candidates make it, because there's really not a lot of percentage left in most cases where your leader is at least in the 30s. Now, when you had, of course, Hillary and Bernie Sanders in 2016, you're talking it was like 45% to 46%. They were actually separated, I think, by only 0.2%. Iowa was super close. And I mean, a hair's length of difference between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, and that went late into the night, and was just, I mean, we're talking, the difference between them was negligible. It was truly a tie. And so now, had Bernie won by 1/10 of 1 percentage point, that would have been big news. The fact that Hillary won sort of maintained her kind of standing as the front runner, but it was that close, really, 0.2 of a percentage point. And you're talking about like 1 delegate out of some rural county. You know, I mean, we're talking such a narrow difference. And so, really, in this contest, though, with all of these candidates, it's not just that there's so many candidates, because even in 2008, when the top three finishers were Obama, Edwards, and Hillary. Well, you had another candidate in that race named Joe Biden. You had Chris Dodd. You had Bill Richardson. There were other candidates in that field. There was Dennis Kucinich. There was Mike Gravel from Alaska. It wasn't really just Hillary and Obama at the beginning. But the fact was, none of those other candidates had any traction and got anywhere close to that 15% threshold. This time, the field is very different, isn't it? We have a number of candidates who are like in the 10, 15 to 20% range. Nobody who's anywhere close to where Obama was at 38%. At the beginning, if you looked at the polls several months ago, I think Joe Biden might have been around 30%. I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't an Iowa poll that might have even got him up to, say, 32%. But he's now down in the middle teens, maybe 15%, 16. It was one as low as 13, maybe 18, somewhere in that range. And you had Elizabeth Warren, had momentum through the summer and reached the mid to high teens, maybe 20% or even 22% in a poll. And now she's kind of sort of stalled a little bit and is kind of, I would say, in the high teens, maybe 20, depending on the poll. Mayor Pete has risen up as the most recent one with momentum. And he's now in that range, right? He's at 18%, maybe 20%. There was a recent poll out, maybe had him at 25 or 26%. Might be a bit of an outlier. He's going to get a lot of attention tonight in the debate, right? When you become the front runner, everybody starts taking a pot shot at you, and then the public starts thinking, well, geez, maybe you're not so perfect after all. And you'd be surprised how you can lose a few percentage points fast. And I'm not predicting that at all for Mayor Pete, but that just sort of seems to what's been happening. So we have this year a field where the top candidates are like stuck around 20%, and there's kind of a bunch of them. I would say that right now we probably have four in this top tier, right? You have Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden and Mayor Pete. And then, as Alan was pointing out earlier today, you've got Amy Klobuchar's been bubbling up into the higher single digits. Tom Steyer's been running a lot of TV ads. He has a lot of money. And he's been bubbling up. A lot of people don't know it. It's below the radar, but he's now in the mid and even moving up a little bit almost into some of the higher single digit numbers in a little more in South Carolina and Nevada, which are a little less contested as the third and fourth states to vote. So he has a little more prominence from his advertising because the candidates aren't there as intensively as they are in Iowa and New Hampshire, the other candidates. So it's very competitive. There's one other difference this year. We've changed a few of the rules. We Democrats, we're always tinkering, right? We always want to make things a little better. We never stop reforming. I've been on 2 different reform commissions. And I was on an advisory group back in the 90s or early 90s. So probably I've been on 3 of these groups now. And so we came up with some recommendations to try and improve the process for 2020. And one of the changes we made, which a lot of people don't know about, is there's really 2 that are relevant to Iowa. And what they are is, number one, for the first time, Iowa is going to have some absentee voting, which is interesting. It's a caucus state. In a caucus state, the way you participate is you show up. Everyone has to be there on a Monday night at 7 p.m. It's always on a Monday night, and it's always at 7 p.m. And if you can't make it in the past, that means you're out of luck. You didn't get to vote, which is different from all of our regular elections, right, where you would get an absentee ballot. If you're out of town, if you're sick, if you're taking care of someone, if you're working, any of those, you're disabled, you can't get there. Well, in the past, you just didn't have the opportunity to participate. But we in the National Party said, you know what, after years of that kind of procedure, we're going to insist that every state have some form of absentee voting so that everybody has a chance to participate. And so this year there will be some absentee voting, and what they're going to do is have some basically like some early voting opportunities in Iowa. And the other change, which is really important, more for the point that I'm discussing now, is in the past, whenever Iowa voted in these caucuses, what they would release are the number of delegates that were elected in each precinct. And Iowa has all of these precincts, like 2,000, I don't remember the exact number. I do know there's 99 counties. But within every county, there's lots of precincts. And so you would go to your neighborhood precinct and people would get to the room at 7 p.m. on Monday night and divide up. Everybody who's for this candidate goes to that part of the room, and they would physically separate. And we call that a walking caucus, because you get up and you vote by walking to that side of the room. And then they count the number of heads and figure out, and have to do a little math. What's that percentage of everyone in the room? And then they all look at the math. Everybody can look at the sheet and see if they made any mistakes. And then they agree. And if there are, say, 6 delegates to be elected in that precinct to go to a county convention a month later, then you would have to get at least 15% of the people in that room to earn any delegates. If you had less than 15%, that presidential candidate couldn't get any delegates, and everyone who had walked over to their caucus but did not now qualify to elect a delegate would get a chance to move. They would get one more chance, like for 15 minutes, you can figure out who your second choice for President of the United States is. And they would get up and they'd walk over to their part of the room, and then they would do the math again, and that would be the final result. And what that meant was, if you had, as a presidential candidate, less than 15% support, how many delegates did you get? You got 0. So if you were at 13% support statewide, when the result was and that was the only report that was given to the press. This time, for the first time ever, the National Party has directed Iowa to release the actual vote count for each of the candidates. So if someone gets 13 or 14 or 12%, that will be known, and that might be good enough to go on to New Hampshire, because you've established that you do have a reasonable level of support, especially if the leader is only around 20. And my guess is the leader will probably be closer to 24, 25, 26% when all is said and done. Usually in the final weeks going into the voting, the candidates who are on top get a little burst of momentum because the voters sort of break to the leaders. A lot of people, they want their vote to count. They want to choose one of the horses who look like they're going to be a potential winner. But that being said, this goes to the original question of how many people can come out of Iowa. This year, I think it's quite possible we will have more than those 3 that have come out in the past. Never more than 3 since the rules were established for this modern era for the 1972 cycle. After the 1968 convention, those of you old enough to remember will, and I was only a little child, that was the chaotic convention during the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights era, when there were riots in the streets in Chicago during the Democratic Convention because the nomination was given to Hubert Humphrey, who never even ran in one primary. And he was the vice president at the time, and the leaders had been Eugene McCarthy, and then it was Bobby Kennedy, and Bobby Kennedy was assassinated after winning the California primary. Really, on the eve of the National Convention, the leader was killed, and the party turned to the incumbent vice president, who had been part of an administration that had been carrying out the Vietnam War under President Johnson's leadership. And there was so much opposition to that there were riots in the street, and it turned out there were some riots in the convention hall. And after that, the National Party decided to rethink how they conduct that national convention and who gets to be a delegate and who chooses who gets to be a delegate. And it was after that 1968 convention that the National Democratic Party decided to let the voters choose the delegates. Because prior to that, it had been the party bosses in each of the states that had picked their state delegations. And so this modern system we have is since 1972, and it's since that 1972, no more than 3 candidates ever got delegates in Iowa. Everyone else was a goose egg. But this time, don't be surprised if 4 or 5 candidates come out of Iowa.
Okay, so let's take this thesis, and then we're going to go to questions in just a minute here. But Jeff, I want you to take one more shot. So we're saying that Iowa really matters, and New Hampshire really matters. But we have one new candidate and one potential new candidate. Deval Patrick, who some of you may recall we had here at American Public Square, and Michael Bloomberg. And neither one of them are likely to compete in Iowa, so how can they even imagine that they could be the nominee?
Well, that's obviously very interesting because on the Democratic side, the contest has begun in Iowa, as I said, since 1972. We had one cycle. In 1992, those of you who remember Bill Clinton's first election, when there was a senator from Iowa who ran for president, Tom Harkin. And because Tom Harkin was in that race, every other candidate, including Bill Clinton, said, I don't think I'm going to compete in Iowa. I'm going to start in New Hampshire with the second state. And as a result, Tom Harkin won Iowa, but he didn't get any credit for it because he didn't really beat anybody because they all conceded the state to him. So we have an example of one time when Iowa was not instrumental in the nomination. But that was unusual, right? Because there was a home state candidate, a favorite son. And so this time now, though, we have what is unique is we actually have 2 billionaire candidates, potentially. We have Tom Steyer, who's already in the race, and we have Mike Bloomberg, who may get in the race. As you know from the news, former Mayor Bloomberg applied to be on the ballot in the Alabama and Arkansas primaries. They had the first 2 filing deadlines in the country. In order to be in the primaries, you have to comply with each state's laws in order to have your name placed on the ballot. And so Mayor Bloomberg decided that he wasn't sure if he was going to run, but he wanted to preserve the opportunity to run and to earn delegates in all of those states. But then when the 3rd filing deadline came, he decided not to file for that. You go, well, what was that? Well, that was the New Hampshire primary. And he declined to file for the New Hampshire primary, so that it is now impossible for his name to be placed on the ballot in New Hampshire. And that's his way of signaling the country that he is not going, he's not planning, and in the case of New Hampshire, cannot in any event compete, not just in Iowa and New Hampshire, but also Nevada and South Carolina, the 4 early states. So this would be the first time in the Democratic Party that we would see a candidate attempt to win the nomination without contesting those first 4 early states that have always determined the momentum throughout the nominating process. So it's unprecedented. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Nobody knows if he can pull this off. But what we do know is he has $52 billion, and that is way more than enough to saturate every media market in the country, to buy all the digital advertising, to set up all the field offices and hire all the organizers, to do all the mail that money can buy, and he's probably not even going to consume the amount of income he'll earn this year. And so, which is probably, I don't know his taxes, but it could be, I'm just sort of guessing, $2 or $3 billion a year. If you've got $52 billion, you can do your own math. What's his rate of return? And so, now Tom Steyer, who is also a billionaire, but Tom Steyer doesn't have $52 billion. He's more like a couple billion. And nobody knows exactly what any of their worth is, right? These are estimates that either Forbes magazine or somebody determines by doing their own assessment. But Tom Steyer has spent hundreds of millions of dollars supporting next gen and climate change issues and democratic causes around the country. So he's used to spending a lot of money also in pursuit of these political causes. But the difference is that Tom Steyer is competing in the 4 early states. So his strategy is to see if he can break through in one or more of these early states, and then also to spend a lot of money after the 4 early states when the voting opens up. And the way this works is we've got those 4 early states, Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina. The following Tuesday is Super Tuesday. That's the first Tuesday in March, when under both Democratic and Republican National Party rules, any state can hold its primary that day if it wants to, or it can hold it later in the spring. As a result, 15 states are voting that day, and that includes California and Texas, which are the number 1 and 2 largest states in the country. And the number of delegates that day that are available for the candidates to win is 1,345 on one day. Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina, if you add up all their delegates, it's 155. So that's 1,345, which is almost 10 times 1,000%, almost, not quite, it's probably 900% of the delegates on that one day. So when you look at the possibility of the Bloomberg strategy and the Steyer strategy of having the resources to advertise fully in every media market, just think of California. I mean, you just start in the north. You got Sacramento, you got San Francisco, you've got Los Angeles, you've got San Diego. You have other cities like Fresno, Bakersfield. If you were to actually check them out in Wikipedia, you'd see they have like a couple million of each. I mean, how many people live, for instance, in the state of Kansas? I mean, you have, it's like a nation out there, right, California? And so you have all of these media markets, and they're very expensive. Los Angeles media market with that saturation of population, really expensive. Texas, you've got Dallas, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, El Paso, Brownsville, Corpus Christi, Lubbock, Abilene. I mean, think of all of the cities whose names you recognize. They all have their own TV markets. And that doesn't include all of these other states that are voting. There's 15 states that day. So all these other candidates, whether it's Vice President Biden or Mayor Pete or Senators Warren, Sanders, and these others, they're sitting on, like, the lucky ones currently have 20, 25 million. Bernie has 33 million. I think he's number 1, but then it quickly drops into the mid and lower 20s. And Vice President Biden, I think, has maybe, I think the latest cash on hand was around 9 million. And so you have all these expenses of the first 4 states that will chew up all of that money for all of them, so they could get to Super Tuesday with almost nothing. They might have $1 million, they might have $5 million, maybe $8 million. A front runner maybe will have $10 million, 15, who knows. These other candidates, Bloomberg has $52 billion. And so we're going to see for the first time what money really can buy. And nobody really knows what's going to happen.
And I think an important distinction here is this. Jeff, you were talking about the early primaries and how they create momentum, and part of that momentum is necessary in order to raise money. In other words, no one's going to give you any more money if they think you're going to lose. And Michael Bloomberg doesn't have that problem, nor does Tom Steyer. I mean, they can stay in basically as long as they want to stay in, and they can continue to have activity. But if you take every other candidate, with the possible exception of Bernie Sanders, I think, who will have enough money no matter how he does, I think, till as long as he wants to stay in. And maybe Elizabeth Warren, we'll see. But the reality is, at a certain point in time, most candidates just sort of have to hang it up because they can't raise any money. Talk about Deval Patrick for just a second, then we'll take questions, okay?
So Governor Deval Patrick from Massachusetts, I know we have some folks from Massachusetts here. Was very popular governor. I'd say he finished up in some ways like President Obama did. I mean, when President Obama finished in the White House after 2 terms, he was popular, he was untainted by scandal. It was considered to be a successful presidency, especially among Democrats. And I think Deval Patrick finished in Massachusetts the same way. Very high regard from the people of Massachusetts. But he's getting in late, so he has to instantly hire a staff, raise money, put together all of his policy positions for this presidential cycle. There's a lot to do. And so he has a challenge. It's going to be like a real challenge for him to get this work done and build the campaign and make an impact, all while not qualifying for the debates. This is the first cycle we've ever had where the Democratic National Party set these terms for the debate the way they are, where you have to both qualify at a certain level in the polls, in the public polls, and you also have to have a minimum number of donors to your campaign. And currently, to get in the debates, you need to have 200,000 individual donors. So Deval Patrick got in the race last week, he didn't have any donors. And so to get to 200,000 is going to be quite a while. What Tom Steyer was able to do, he got in the race relatively late, but it now looks midstream. He got in at the end of the summer and immediately started spending millions of dollars, and I think he's now spent about 40 million plus on television ads to raise his identity with the voters and also to advertise over the internet on social media, especially Facebook ads, where they'll spend $10 on a Facebook ad to ask you to donate $1. And you say, well, why do you spend $10 to earn $1? Especially if you're a businessman, that's a losing proposition. And the reason is because that's the only way you can get those 200,000 donors. They would practically give the person, it would be cheaper to give them the dollar and say, give it back to me. But the way it works is you can't even get people to give you the dollar. You have to convince them through advertising to donate $1. You're a billionaire and you're asking people to give you money. It's a hard sales pitch, right? And that's why it's expensive. It costs $10 to get them to give you $1. But he did it, and he was very disciplined in how he did it, very strategic, and he has qualified for the debates. But Deval Patrick will have a lot of difficulty qualifying. Well, he won't be in the debate anytime soon. Maybe in some future debate he will finally have caught up to qualify. And the same thing with Mike Bloomberg. He's going to self-finance, so how's he going to have 200,000 donors? And so even if he was polling high enough, he still wouldn't qualify to be in a debate. And so these candidates need to develop a strategy for how do I compete for the presidential nomination when I'm not allowed on the debate stage because I got in late or my strategy doesn't include raising money from lots of small donors.
Well, I heard that Bloomberg's strategy basically is just to buy a television network, and then he'll hold his own debates. Okay, we can take some questions now.
I just have a question on this. So if somebody like Bloomberg starts polling higher than everybody else, but still doesn't have the $200,000 donors, then they'll never let him on the debate.
Exactly.
Right.
Even if he's the front runner.
That's right. That's right. And this is the system that the Democratic Party built. And you would wonder, well, why? Let's talk just for a minute, because the debates are an important part of the competition for the nomination. And I can tell you from working in past campaigns, presidential campaigns, that campaigns are inundated with debate requests. Every organization in the country wants the presidential candidates to come to their organization and do a debate. And because they're going to provide the moderators and they're going to ask questions of interest to their organization. So that presidential candidates just get inundated with these requests and they have a hard time saying no. So if the leading African-American group in the Democratic Party asks you for a debate, are you going to say no and turn down a very important constituency? What about Latinx? What about a gay group? What about an environmental group? I mean, we have so many different groups, so many different issues. What about gun control group? Where there are a lot of groups that Democrats care about, and they all have their own advocacy group. They don't have just one, but a lot of these issue and constituency groups have multiple different groups that represent maybe different wings of those movements. And so the candidates get inundated, and then they have to start saying no to most of them because they can't debate everywhere. They have to go to Iowa and New Hampshire and campaign. They have to raise money. They have to go to fundraisers. So they have actually limited time to debate. And so what happened was, to protect these candidates and provide some order. Remember how I talked about how the National Party has provided order to the voting calendar by designating the early states and protecting that early window. Well, by the same token, for this cycle, they said, okay, the DNC will approve which debates the candidates can go to. The candidates can only go to these debates. If they go to other debates, then they're not allowed in these debates, and these are the main debates. And so the candidates are going only to the approved debates, and there's only one per month, and it's carefully chosen, and the National Party picks which TV network will carry it, and they work with that network to pick moderators who they think will be fair to the Democratic candidates, not always perfect. And but that's the rationale. And then they said, well, if we're going to have debates, we need criteria as to who can qualify. Because not just anybody, everyone in this audience can get on the stage and debate. We need to define who's eligible. And it was in that they decided to come up. And this is, by the way, just the total single decision of the chairman of the Democratic Party. It's Tom Perez. And so Tom, he is the one, there's a lot of authority that's invested in the chairman. When it's not in the official rules of the party, who else can decide anything? Well, it's the chairman. And that's pretty much how we're structured. And so Tom came up with this set of rules that you need a certain polling percentage because candidates who can't get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% in the polls are so low that they're crowding the stage, and the voters need to be able to hear the most important candidates and can't hear anyone and everyone who just wants to run for president. And then the other way, they said, just so that it won't only be polling, we'll add a second criteria of you need to show that you have the support of the broad public by having a lot of donors. Nobody thought how that would exclude a candidate who got in late and wouldn't have time to build up that list of donors. And nobody thought at the time when these criteria were created that a candidate would come in and self-fund, meaning they would have the wherewithal to finance a race, but they would just be doing it a different way. And so what we're now seeing as Deval Patrick and Bloomberg are affected, and as earlier as Governor Bullock from Montana, Steve Bullock, he got in sort of late and has had trouble meeting the criteria. We have had important Democratic office holders and personalities who are not being allowed on the stage due to the arbitrary nature of these criteria. And the fact that they're not being allowed on the stage is, you know, as far as I'm concerned, it's inadvertent. Nobody expected that a governor wouldn't make the cut, or a former governor like Deval Patrick, who is highly respected in his home state, wouldn't be permitted to be in the debate. But that's the system we have now. And so you can see this is politics and how sometimes things sort of happen not by plan. And for the next 4 years, believe me, people will be discussing whether this was the right way to structure the system.
Okay, we got time for a few more questions. Jeff's going to give shorter answers.
Yeah.
And what I want to say is that, you can only say that to friends. I think that and if we don't get to your question, if you go to AmericanPublicSquare.org and send the question, he's going to be doing a podcast and he'll answer your question on the podcast. So, yes, sir.
One person you didn't mention is Senator Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
And she was playing really well, and she kind of dropped off. And I just listened to a podcast today where it said her focus and strategy is really on South Carolina. And that's for the African American. So I'm wondering if she captures one of those first 4 states, and then that's kind of the strategy of like getting the public momentum, and then she goes back to California where she's from. Does that then kind of help swing momentum toward her?
Yeah.
I don't know if you can comment on that strategy.
Yeah, I'll try and be much briefer. So with Senator Harris, she began the campaign. She had 22,000 people at her opening rally, which no other candidate has duplicated, and that was in Oakland. It was very impressive. She raised decent money. She was raising money from private fundraising events and also from small dollar donors. It was very balanced and effective. She had the very effective line of questioning with Vice President Biden during the debate in the summer, but then her campaign fell off. And why it fell off, the historians, I'll let them decide. But where she is now is her polling has declined nationally and in the early states and in her home state of California. She's under 10% in her home state of California. And so what I believe her focus is now is she's all in Iowa, that she's taking the very traditional path of trying to break through in Iowa. And if she can do that, then her emphasis will be on South Carolina. But I do not believe that she intends to start in South Carolina, because if she waits until South Carolina and has lost in Iowa, lost in New Hampshire, lost in Nevada, the voters in South Carolina, including the African American voters, will not view her as a viable candidate. And they will be looking at others. See, the thing is, when you don't win, one of the things that means is somebody else is. And so somebody else has momentum, and somebody else is viable when you're not. And so for her, she needs to break through in Iowa.
Okay, Paul Russell.
Open primary, good idea or mischief maker?
Okay.
Remember, we're from Missouri. 10 years ago, that had a big impact here.
Yes. So in some states in this country, voters can register their party affiliation, and in other states, you just register to vote and not your party affiliation. And so in all of those states where you don't register by party, basically anybody can go in there and grab the Democratic Party ballot when it's time to vote. And you obviously have to choose one ballot or the other, because the primary for the Democrats and the Republicans is at the same time. So you take one ballot. But since you're not registered by party, and I believe that's the case in Missouri, you have your choice on the ballot. That opens the possibility for mischief. That is, Republicans can pull a Democratic ballot and vote for who they think is the worst candidate. And that is often feared but rarely occurs. Most voters are not tactical. They go to the election to vote for the candidate they want to be president, and they're not trying to outsmart everybody. There are some states where there have been organized efforts to do that. The one that always comes to mind is Michigan, where they actually, especially now with social media, where everybody can say, hey, let's all grab the ballot of the other party and vote for so-and-so who's a big dummy. And, and there's this fear that that will happen, but it really, for all practical purposes, it doesn't.
Okay, Leslie.
Jeff, it's great. You beat Nate Silver and Steve Bernanke, a bunch of geeks are loving it. And just as an aside, January 21st, I believe, is the 10th anniversary of Citizens United. So a lot of what you spoke about, hard to believe it's been that long, right? But this conversation, I think, will only deepen through the election cycle, and hopefully beyond, we get that yoke off of us. My observation is that many people, though they understand the American liberal democracy, democratic experience, they're as being defined by two parties. They don't understand, they don't interact much with, and they don't support those parties. Theirs or the other guys. I'm a grassroots organizer, and civic engagement is my goal. And my ask of you is to explain a little bit differently than how you've been tackling it from within the party structure. What would be the most important lift over the course of the next 12 months for individual campaigns, the the parties and the grassroots to undertake?
Great question.
Okay. Well, in terms of essentially what you're talking about, I believe, is mobilizing for the fall election for each of the parties. Obviously I come from the Democratic Party, but both of the national parties sort of have a parallel but opposing interest for the general election in November of next year. And the task is to, of course, register people who are likely to vote for your party, engage them, learn who they are, what they're interested in, and then turn them out for that election. And with the increasing polarization that we have in the country, where more and more voters have moved to the separate camps of the Republican and Democratic Party, and even people who are unaffiliated actually secretly mostly have an affiliation. They just don't like to either talk about it or express it by registering for that party in a state that permits it. Again, in Missouri, you don't even register by party anyway. You're just self-identifying when you say, I am a Democrat or I am a Republican. Most, even as I said, the independent voters actually have a strong lean to one of the two parties. That middle sliver of truly persuadable people who move back and forth between the parties has gotten narrower and narrower. And this is one of the things I think that the George W. Bush campaign and Karl Rove recognized, which was that perhaps the most important thing in this modern era of polarization is not to spend a lot of time and effort persuading swing voters or truly unaligned voters to be for your candidate, but just to convince those people who are inclined to your candidate to actually vote. And it becomes then a turnout battle between the two parties. And so, to the extent that's the case, the two parties need to identify who their voters are, how to connect with them, and to build that infrastructure locally to turn people out. And in some ways, it's almost a return to a kind of politics that goes back many, many years. And I would say in this town, it might be the Pendergast machine, where, and you know what, okay.
He's related.
Oh, you're, okay, there you go. Well, those political machines of yesteryear, and not just here, but in all the major urban areas, they knew who their voters were. They had an organization down to the city block. They took care of their voters. When their voters needed something, they knew who to go to. They would help them. And then when it came time to vote, the machine, that political machine, came back to them and said, we helped you with this, we helped you with that. Today we need your vote. And people would get out and vote. And it's that kind of an incredible attention to detail. And now with all of the modern data management systems we have and all of the social media communication, what we may see is almost a rebuilding of the old structures, but using modern technology and means, to really identify and build up that identification. As you mentioned, a lot of people don't engage in the party. Well, there are a lot of Democrats who don't support Donald Trump for president and are really motivated, and those people need to be understood by the party structure, where they are, who they are, and have that means to turn them out. And in the post-Citizens United era, both parties have tremendous amounts of money that will be and are being poured into not just the party, but we have this whole new system of basically independent expenditures. In Washington, we call them IE groups. And these IE groups are formed for the left and the right, Democratic leaning or Republican leaning. They're building their operations, their capacity to reach and turn out voters using technology more than the old machine structure. And that, to some extent, is a bit of the wave of the future. But there's still always a role, because a lot of the political people will tell you there's nothing like personal contact to get people to understand the importance of voting and actually voting. But it takes a lot of work.
Okay, I think unfortunately, we've run out of time on the questions, but again, AmericanPublicSquare.org, you'll get your question answered. Before I turn this over to Claire to close the program out, I do want to let you know, Jeff, that the byword of the Pendergast, one of the bywords of the Pendergast machine here was, just because you died doesn't mean you gave up your right to vote. Okay, so without further ado.
Thank you very much. Thank you all so much for being here. Let's give Jeff Berman a great round of applause. Thank you. That was just a fantastic speech, program, Q&A, and I learned a lot myself. I hope those of you in the audience who joined us for this inaugural event in the Nuts and Bolts of Democracy program can also say the same. My name is Claire Bishop. As Alan mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of American Public Square at Jewell, and I'm really honored to see you all here this evening. So thank you for making time to be here and attend this presentation this evening. I want to thank our program and presenting sponsors for helping to make this event possible. Absolutely want to thank Mr. Jeff Berman for a great discussion this evening. I want to thank the staff of 433 Ward Parkway who have helped us make this happen, and also the staff of American Public Square. I don't want this to go unsaid that there were no shorter than 5 of us working to erect this sign that stands behind you here at about 4:45 when we did that. I know it's a little saggy on the top, but we're going to get better at that, I promise you. So, yeah, really thrilled to have you all here tonight. Thank you again. As Alan mentioned, if you've got questions and you'd like to get those answered, we are going to do a post-event recap and answer some questions. So you can send those to info@americanpublicsquare.org or stop by and see us at the membership table on your way out, and we'll be happy to write those down. And we'll publish something on the website to answer some questions from Jeff on the post. So thank you very much. Please feel free to stay. Enjoy some refreshments, and I hope you'll come back and join us. We're going to be doing our member social here on December 5th, same location, so now you've figured out parking if you haven't been here before, and tomorrow we'll be sending an official invite with a link that works so you can RSVP and attend that evening too. So thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.